The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Mount Sinai Hospital's VIP wing, but Alexander Sterling couldn't feel its warmth. His fingers drummed nervously against the armrest of the plush leather chair in Dr. Chen's office, creating a rhythm that matched his racing heartbeat. At 45, he had everything money could buy. A tech empire worth billions, homes across the globe, and a fleet of cars that would make collectors weep. Yet here he sat, about to face news that could shatter his last remaining dream. "The results are conclusive, Mr. Sterling," Dr. Chen said, her voice gentle but professional as she adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses. She'd been his doctor for the past 5 years, watching him pour millions into fertility treatments, each failure cutting deeper than the last. "The condition is permanent. I'm very sorry." Alexander leaned forward, his perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit suddenly feeling too tight around his chest. "There must be some mistake," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "With today's technology, surely there's something we haven't tried." Dr. Chen shook her head slowly, spreading out the test results on her mahogany desk. The papers were covered in graphs and medical terms, but to Alexander, they might as well have been his death sentence. "We've conducted every available test multiple times. The radiation exposure from your cancer treatment 20 years ago has left you completely sterile. No amount of medical intervention can reverse this." The words hit him like a physical blow. Alexander stood up abruptly, walking to the window. Below, New York City bustled with life. Parents pushing strollers, kids racing to school, families going about their daily routines. All the things he'd never have. "What about the experimental treatments in Switzerland?" he asked, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. "Price isn't an issue. I can fly out tomorrow." "Mr. Sterling," Dr. Chen's chair creaked as she stood, "I understand this is difficult to accept. But throwing money at it won't change the reality. Have you considered other options? Adoption, perhaps, or surrogacy with a donor?" Alexander turned, a bitter smile playing on his lips. "I've built everything from nothing, Dr. Chen. Sterling Tech employs over 100,000 people worldwide. Our clean energy solutions are helping solve climate change. I've created something that will outlive me, but," his voice cracked slightly, "I just wanted someone to share it with. Someone who carries a piece of me." The doctor's expression softened. She'd seen many patients face infertility, but something about Alexander's vulnerability. This powerful man looking so lost touched her heart. "Family isn't just about DNA, Mr. Sterling. Sometimes the most beautiful bonds are the ones we choose to create." Alexander nodded absently, but his mind was already elsewhere. He thought about his childhood in foster care, bouncing from home to home until he aged out of the system. He'd promised himself that when he had kids, they'd never know that uncertainty. They'd have stability, love, and every opportunity he'd fought so hard to create for himself. Walking back to his chair, he picked up his coat. "Thank you, Dr. Chen, for everything." His voice was steady now, but his eyes betrayed his pain. "Wait," she called as he reached for the door handle. "I'm adding a referral to Dr. Thompson. He's an excellent therapist who specializes in helping patients process infertility. Please consider talking to him." Alexander paused, then took the card she held out. Outside, his driver waited with the car door open, but instead of getting in, he waved him off. "I'll walk," he said, needing the time to think. As he made his way through Central Park, the autumn leaves crunching beneath his Italian leather shoes, Alexander felt the weight of his empire pressing down on him. Every achievement, every milestone suddenly felt hollow. His phone buzzed constantly. Board members, partners, assistants all demanding his attention. But for the first time in his career, he ignored them all. Near the park center, he stopped to watch a father teaching his young daughter to ride a bike. The little girl wobbled, fell, then got back up laughing as her father cheered her on. Alexander turned away, his throat tight. Back in his penthouse office, he stood before the wall of achievements, magazine covers, awards, patents. "The man who changed energy," one headline proclaimed. "Sterling's vision shapes the future," declared another. But tonight, all he could think about was a future he'd never have, first steps he'd never witness, bedtime stories he'd never read, daddy-daughter dances he'd never attend. His assistant knocked softly, entering with his evening schedule. The charity gala for children's education starts in 2 hours, sir. Should I have your tuxedo prepared? Alexander almost cancelled. The irony of attending a children's charity event today felt like too much. But something stopped him. Maybe it was Dr. Chen's words about choosing to create bonds, or maybe it was just his stubborn refusal to let personal pain interfere with professional commitments. Yes, he said finally, and Lisa, clear my schedule for tomorrow. I need time to think. As the sun set over Manhattan, casting long shadows across his office, Alexander Sterling made a decision. He couldn't change the cards life had dealt him, but perhaps there were other ways to leave a legacy. He just didn't know yet what they might be. Little did he know, fate had its own plans, and his true legacy was about to unfold in ways he could never imagine. 6 months had passed since that devastating day in Dr. Chen's office. Alexander Sterling stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting his bow tie with practiced precision. Another charity gala, another evening of forced smiles and small talk. These events had become increasingly difficult to endure. Every conversation seemed to eventually turn to family, legacy, or worse, well-meaning suggestions about his personal life. The Metropolitan Museum of Art buzzed with New York's elite, all gathered for the Building Dreams Foundation's annual fundraiser for children's education. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the crowd, their light catching on designer gowns and expensive jewelry. Alexander moved through the space like a ghost, nodding at familiar faces but avoiding lengthy conversations. Mr. Sterling. A board member waved him over. Have you met my new grandchildren? Twin boys. He proudly showed photos on his phone, not noticing how Alexander's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Excuse me, Alexander said after a polite moment. I need some air. He found refuge in the Egyptian wing, where the ancient artifacts stood silent witness to his troubled thoughts. Here, away from the party's chaos, he could drop the mask he'd been wearing for months. They're quite something, aren't they? A warm voice interrupted his solitude. These artifacts have survived thousands of years, yet they still tell stories. Alexander turned, ready to dismiss whoever had invaded his space, but the words died in his throat. The woman before him wasn't dressed in the typical gala attire. Instead, she wore a simple but elegant burgundy dress that complemented her dark skin beautifully. Her natural hair was styled in a sophisticated updo, and she carried herself with quiet confidence. Dr. Maya Washington, she introduced herself, extending her hand. And you're Alexander Sterling. Your renewable energy technology is powering my clinic in Brownsville. Your clinic? He asked, genuinely interested for the first time that evening. The Hope Children's Health Center, she explained, her eyes lighting up. We provide pediatric care to underserved communities. Actually, I've been hoping to talk to you about potentially expanding our solar program. Alexander found himself drawn into a conversation that had nothing to do with his personal life or achievements. Instead, Maya spoke passionately about the children she treated, the challenges they faced, and her dreams of creating a healthcare model that could be replicated in other communities. You know, she said, leading him through the gallery, one of my patients, a little boy with severe asthma, drew this picture of what he thought your solar panels looked like. She pulled out her phone, showing him a crayon drawing of what looked like magical floating circles. He calls them sun catchers and believes they're helping him breathe better. Alexander felt something shift inside him, a crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. Is he right? Has air quality improved in the area? By 23% since your company installed the panels, Maya replied. But that's not why I'm telling you this story. Sometimes the most meaningful impact we have isn't in the big numbers or breakthrough technologies. It's in the small moments, in the lives we touch without even knowing it. Their conversation flowed naturally as they wandered through the museum's quiet halls. Maya told him about growing up with a single mother who worked 3 jobs to put her through medical school. He shared stories about his time in foster care, something he rarely discussed with anyone. That's actually why I started the clinic, Maya revealed. I remember what it's like to be a child who needs help but can't access it. Every kid deserves a chance at a healthy life, regardless of their circumstances. As they talked, Alexander noticed something different about Maya. Unlike the social climbers he usually encountered at these events, she challenged his views, disagreed with him respectfully, and spoke with genuine passion about her work. "Your security team has been following us for the past hour," she noted with amusement. "They must think I'm either trying to kidnap you or pitch you a business deal." Alexander laughed, a real laugh, his first in months. "Maybe both." "Neither actually," Maya said, checking her watch. "I need to head home. Early surgeries tomorrow." "Let me have my driver take you," Alexander offered, surprised by his reluctance to end their conversation. "I'll take the subway, but thank you," she declined with a smile. "It was nice meeting you, Mr. Sterling. And if you're ever in Brownsville, stop by the clinic. See those sun catchers in action." Before he could respond, she had disappeared into the crowd, leaving him standing there with a strange feeling in his chest. It wasn't until later that night, lying awake in his penthouse, that he realized what it was: hope. The next morning, instead of heading to his office, Alexander did something unprecedented. He asked his driver to take him to Brownsville. The Hope Children's Health Center was a modest building, but it hummed with life. Through the windows, he could see children in the waiting room, some playing, others being comforted by parents. And there was Maya, in scrubs now instead of an evening gown, kneeling down to talk to a young patient at eye level. She looked up and caught his gaze through the window, her surprised smile warming something inside him that had been cold for too long. Maybe, he thought as he walked toward the entrance, Dr. Chen had been right. Maybe there were different ways to create a legacy, different kinds of families to build. He just hadn't been ready to see them until now. Over the next few months, Alexander found himself spending more and more time at the Hope Children's Health Center. He started simple, upgrading their solar system, installing better air filtration, donating new medical equipment. But soon, his visits became about more than just facility improvements. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, he sat in Maya's tiny office, sharing takeout Chinese food as they discussed plans for expanding the clinic. The space was cluttered with children's drawings, medical journals, and family photos. His eye caught one particular picture, Maya holding two beautiful babies. "Those are my little ones," she said, following his gaze. "They just turned 2 last month." There was unmistakable pride in her voice, mixed with something else, a gentle caution, as if she was worried about his reaction. Alexander set down his chopsticks, surprised. In all their conversations, she'd never mentioned being a mother. "They're beautiful," he said sincerely. "I didn't know you were married." Maya laughed softly, adjusting her stethoscope around her neck. "I'm not. It's quite a storied, actually." She paused, considering her words carefully. "I always wanted to be a mother, but between medical school, residency, and starting this clinic, finding the right partner just wasn't in the cards. So 2 years ago, I made a decision. I chose to become a single mother through IVF." The words hung in the air between them. Alexander felt a familiar ache in his chest, but it was different now, less sharp, more bittersweet. "That must have taken incredible courage," he said finally. "It was scary," Maya admitted, turning to look out the rain-streaked window. "But sometimes the best things in life come from our scariest decisions. The twins are my world now. They make every long day worth it." Alexander watched her face soften as she talked about her children. "Do they stay with family while you work?" "They're actually right downstairs in our daycare center. Want to meet them?" The invitation was casual, but they both felt its weight. The pediatric center's daycare was a bright, cheerful space filled with the sound of children's laughter. In a corner near a bookshelf, 2 toddlers played with wooden blocks. The little girl was attempting to stack them as high as possible, while her brother seemed more interested in knocking them down. "Hey, sweethearts," Maya called softly. Both children looked up, their faces breaking into identical grins that made Alexander's heart skip a beat. They had their mother's warm brown eyes and infectious smile. "These are my twins, Joy and River," Maya introduced them. "Kids, this is Mommy's friend, Mr. Sterling." "Hi," Joy said boldly, while River shyly hid behind his sister, peeking out curiously. Before Alexander knew what was happening, Joy had grabbed his hand and was pulling him toward their block corner. "Help build?" she asked, offering him a red block. For the next hour, Alexander Sterling, the billionaire who could buy anything, sat cross-legged on a daycare floor, building block towers with 2 toddlers. He listened to Joy's elaborate stories about each structure they built, helped River overcome his shyness through a shared love of knocking things down, and felt something heal inside him with each burst of children's laughter. Maya watched from the doorway, her expression unreadable. This was why she'd hesitated to tell him about the twins, not because she was ashamed or uncertain, but because she knew his story, knew his pain about not being able to have children of his own. "Cookie time," the daycare teacher announced, and the twins rushed off with the other children, leaving Alexander to slowly stand up, his expensive suit slightly wrinkled. "They're amazing," he said softly to Maya. "You've done an incredible job with them. Would you like to join us for dinner sometime?" Maya asked suddenly. "The twins seem to like you, and—" She hesitated. It's nice having another adult to talk to who doesn't mind floor-level block construction. Alexander felt a warmth spread through his chest. "I'd like that very much." That evening, driving back to his penthouse, Alexander realized something had shifted. The pain of his infertility diagnosis was still there, but it had changed shape. Spending time with Maya and her children hadn't made him yearn for what he couldn't have. Instead, it had shown him a different kind of joy, a different way to be part of a family. His phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Joy asked if you're coming back tomorrow to finish the super tall castle. No pressure, but apparently you're the only one who builds it right." Alexander smiled, remembering the determination on Joy's face as she carefully placed each block, and River's delighted giggles when they let him knock everything down. He typed back, "Wouldn't miss it for the world." As he looked out over the city lights, Alexander thought about how life had a way of surprising you. 6 months ago, he'd thought his dreams of family were shattered. Now, here he was, building block castles with 2 children who had somehow worked their way into his heart, and growing closer to a woman who challenged and inspired him in equal measure. Little did he know, the biggest surprise was yet to come, one that would turn his world upside down in ways he could never imagine. Dinner at Maya's modest brownstone had become a weekly tradition over the past 2 months. Alexander would arrive after work, usually bearing some new educational toy for the twins or a home-cooked meal prepared by his chef. Tonight was different, though. Maya had insisted on cooking herself, saying she had something important to discuss. The autumn evening was cool, and the smell of Maya's famous vegetable lasagna filled the warm kitchen. The twins were already in bed upstairs, their day's artwork proudly displayed on the refrigerator. Alexander noticed a new drawing, stick figures of what looked like 4 people holding hands. "Joy drew that today," Maya said, pulling the lasagna from the oven. She said, "It's our family." There was something in her voice that made Alexander turn to look at her more closely. "Is everything okay?" he asked, helping her set the table. He'd gotten to know her well enough to sense when something was bothering her. Maya waited until they were both seated before speaking. "I need to tell you something, and I'm not quite sure how." She took a deep breath, pushing her food around her plate. "Remember when I told you about choosing to have the twins through IVF?" Alexander nodded, his heart rate picking up slightly. Over the past months, he'd grown to love those children as if they were his own, but there was always a careful line he tried not to cross, respecting Maya's role as their mother. "Well, I've been going through some old paperwork for their medical records," Maya continued, her hands slightly shaking as she reached for a folder on the counter. "And I found something about the fertility clinic I used." Alexander took a sip of water, trying to calm the sudden nervousness in his stomach. "What about it?" "It was the New Hope Fertility Center on 5th Avenue, Maya said, watching his face carefully. The glass nearly slipped from Alexander's hand. "What did you say?" "New Hope Fertility Center," Maya repeated softly. "The same clinic where, according to Dr. Chen's records, you made a donation 15 years ago, before your cancer treatment." The room seemed to spin. Alexander gripped the edge of the table, memories flooding back. He'd been 28, just starting his company, barely making rent. The clinic had offered good money for donations, and he'd never imagined. "When?" he whispered. "When exactly did you conceive?" Maya opened the folder with trembling hands. "The donation I used was from 2010. It had been preserved in their long-term storage facility." She pulled out a paper, his intake form from 15 years ago, with all his personal information carefully anonymized except for basic health history and education background. "I chose this donor because of the medical history," No genetic diseases, high IQ, athletic background, Maya continued, her voice barely steady. They listed him as a graduate student in engineering who'd gone on to start a successful tech company. Alexander stared at the form, his vision blurring. He remembered filling it out, sitting in that sterile office, young and broke but full of dreams. But that was before everything. Before the cancer, before the treatments that made me sterile. Alexander, Maya said gently, reaching across the table to touch his hand. I'm not showing you this to upset you, but look at the twins. Look at Joy's smile, at River's way with numbers and patterns. Haven't you ever wondered why they took to you so quickly? Why they feel so familiar? He had. God help him, he had. From the first moment he'd met them, something had clicked. The way River would furrow his brow when concentrating, just like Alexander did. Joy's determined spirit that matched his own at that age. We need to be sure, he said, his voice hoarse. We need. I already am, Maya interrupted softly. I had DNA tests done last week. I wanted to be certain before I told you. She pulled out another paper from the folder. You're their biological father, Alexander. The world stopped. Everything, his business empire, his wealth, his achievements, all of it faded away in that moment. All he could see was Joy's drawing on the refrigerator, 4 stick figures holding hands. I have children, he whispered, tears rolling down his cheeks. I have a family. Maya moved her chair next to his, wrapping her arms around him as he broke down. They already love you, she said softly. They loved you before either of us knew. The universe has a funny way of bringing people together. Upstairs, they heard a small thump followed by the pitter-patter of little feet. Mummy, Joy's voice called from the top of the stairs. Is Alex crying? Maya wiped her own tears, calling back. Everything's okay, sweetie. Go back to bed. But Joy was already padding down the stairs in her star-patterned pajamas, River close behind her. They both climbed into Alexander's lap without hesitation, tiny arms wrapping around his neck. Don't be sad, River whispered, patting Alexander's cheek with his small hand. I'm not sad, Alexander managed to say, holding them close. These are happy tears, the happiest tears I've ever cried. As he sat there, holding his children, Alexander realized that sometimes the greatest gifts come in the most unexpected ways. He looked at Maya over the twins' heads, seeing in her eyes the same mix of fear, joy, and wonder that he felt. They had a lot to figure out, a lot to discuss. But for now, in this moment, everything felt perfectly, incredibly right. The morning after the revelation, Alexander sat in his home office, staring at the DNA test results spread across his desk. The sun was barely rising over New York City, casting a golden glow through the windows, but he hadn't slept all night. How could he? His whole world had shifted on its axis. His phone buzzed, a message from Maya with a photo of the twins eating breakfast. Joy had syrup all over her face, and River was carefully arranging his pancake pieces in perfect geometric patterns. The caption read, "They've been asking when you're coming back." Alexander touched the screen gently, seeing his own traits in their faces with new eyes. River's methodical nature, Joy's infectious laugh, they weren't just coincidences anymore. They were inherited traits, pieces of himself living on in these incredible little people. A knock on his office door interrupted his thoughts. His assistant Linda entered, carrying her usual morning stack of papers. "Sir, the board is asking about the Tokyo meeting, and there's a situation with the new solar plant in Arizona that needs your attention." "Cancel everything," Alexander said quietly. Linda blinked, 20 years of working for him having never heard those words. "I'm sorry." "Cancel everything," he repeated, standing up. "Clear my schedule for the next 2 weeks. There's something more important I need to focus on." An hour later, he sat in Dr. Chen's office again, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. His longtime physician listened intently as he shared the incredible discovery, her expression moving from surprise to joy. "I always tell my patients that life finds a way," she said warmly. "But this is remarkable. Have you thought about what comes next?" Alexander ran his hands through his hair, something he did when overwhelmed. "That's why I'm here. I need to know everything, genetic health screenings, potential inherited conditions, everything I should have known as a father from day one. I've missed 2 years of their lives. I can't miss anything else." Dr. Chen nodded understanding. We'll run a full panel. But Alexander, she added gently, don't get lost in the medical details. The most important thing those children need isn't perfect genetic screening, it's love and presence. Later that afternoon, Alexander found himself in a high-end toy store, feeling completely out of his depth. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals with less anxiety than he felt picking out age-appropriate toys. A kind elderly employee noticed his confusion. First time shopping for your children? She asked with a knowing smile. Is it that obvious? He laughed nervously. Only to another parent, she winked. Tell me about them. As Alexander described the twins' personalities and interests, he felt a surge of pride he'd never experienced before. The employee helped him select educational toys that would challenge River's logical mind and creative supplies for Joy's artistic spirit. But when he arrived at Maya's house, arms full of bags, she met him with a serious expression. We need to talk, she said, ushering him into the living room while the twins napped upstairs. Alexander, she began carefully. I know you're excited, and believe me, I am too. But we need to think this through carefully. The twins have a routine, a stable life. We can't just suddenly change everything. He set the bags down, nodding slowly. I know. I've been thinking about that too. Maya, I want to do this right. Whatever you think is best for them, I'll follow your lead. Her expression softened. They ask about you when you're not here, you know. Joy told her preschool teacher that her friend Alex builds the best block towers in the world. Just friend Alex? He asked, his heart squeezing. For now, Maya said gently. We need to take this slowly, introduce changes gradually. They're at an age where they understand more than we think. We need to be careful with their hearts. Alexander leaned back on the couch, closing his eyes. I never thought I'd have this chance, he admitted, to be a father. Now that I am one, I'm terrified of messing it up. Maya sat beside him, taking his hand. Welcome to parenthood, she smiled. We're all terrified of messing up. But you know what? Look how amazing they're turning out so far. We'll figure this out together. A small noise from the baby monitor caught their attention. River was awake, calling for his mom. They headed upstairs together, finding him sitting up in his bed, clutching his favorite stuffed elephant. Alex. His face lit up upon seeing them both. Hey, buddy, Alexander said softly, his heart full. River reached for him without hesitation, and as Alexander lifted him from the bed, he caught Maya wiping away a tear. Joy woke up moments later, and soon the four of them were sitting on the floor of the playroom, the new toys forgotten as the twins showed Alexander their favorite books. As he read Goodnight Moon for the third time, Joy curled up in his lap while River leaned against his side. He realized something profound. Being a father wasn't about DNA tests or medical screenings or even having the right toys. It was about these moments, reading the same book over and over, wiping sticky faces after meals, building block towers that would inevitably fall. It was about being there, being present, being loved. Later that night, after the twins were asleep, Alexander and Maya sat on her front porch, sharing a quiet moment under the stars. We should get a lawyer involved, Maya said practically. Figure out the legal aspects. Already done, Alexander replied. But Maya? I want you to know something. Nothing has to change that you don't want to change. You've given them an amazing life. I just want to be part of it in whatever way you think is best. She smiled, squeezing his hand. They're lucky to have you as their father. Even before we knew, you loved them. That's what matters most. As Alexander drove home that night, he passed the hospital where he'd received his devastating diagnosis months ago. But now, instead of pain, he felt gratitude. Sometimes life's hardest moments led to its greatest gifts. He just had to be patient enough to let them unfold. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. Alexander was having breakfast with the twins when his phone started buzzing nonstop. The headline flashed across his screen. Tech billionaire's secret children discovered. Sterling's miracle twins. Everything okay? Maya asked, noticing his sudden tension as she packed the kids' lunchboxes. Alexander showed her his phone, watching her face pale. Somehow, despite their best efforts to keep things private, the story had leaked. Already, paparazzi were gathering outside Maya's brownstone and his penthouse. I'll handle this, he said firmly, already dialing his PR team. But Maya stopped him with a gentle hand on his arm. "We handle this together," she corrected. "They're our children, and we need to protect them as a united front." The next few days were chaos. News vans camped outside the children's preschool, forcing Maya to temporarily withdraw them. Reporters dug into every aspect of their lives, spinning wild theories about their relationship and the twins' conception. "Look at this garbage," Alexander fumed one evening, reading through the tabloid headlines. "Gold digger doctor plans baby trap." "They're making you sound like some kind of scheming villain." Maya sat beside him on her living room couch, surprisingly calm. Upstairs, the twins were finally asleep after a day spent confused about why they couldn't go to school or play in the park. "People will always talk," she said softly. "What matters is what we know is true." But the pressure was taking its toll. The twins picked up on the tension, becoming clingy and anxious. River stopped sleeping through the night, and Joy grew unusually quiet, her usual cheerful chatter subdued. One night, after another nightmare had River crying for both his mom and Alex, they realized something had to change. "Move in with me," Alexander suggested suddenly, as they sat in River's room watching him finally sleep. "My penthouse has better security, private access. The kids would be safer." Maya looked at him sharply. "Alexander." "Not permanently," he added quickly. "Just until this dies down. The building has a private playground on the roof, and I can convert the guest wing into a space for you and the kids. They wouldn't have to stay cooped up inside all day." Maya was quiet for a long moment, running her fingers through River's curls. And what happens when the media spins that into another scandal? Billionaire moves in secret family. "Let them talk," Alexander said firmly. "Our priority is the kids. Everything else is just noise." After much discussion and careful planning, they made the move. Alexander's penthouse transformed overnight. Designer furniture was replaced with child-safe alternatives, priceless art gave way to finger paintings, and his pristine white carpets were covered with colorful playmats. The twins were delighted with their new rooms, especially the custom murals Alexander had painted, a space theme for River and an enchanted forest for Joy. Maya tried to tell him it was too much, but he just smiled. "I have 2 years of birthdays and Christmases to make up for," he said simply. But living together brought its own challenges. Maya struggled with the loss of her independence, feeling sometimes like a guest in the grand apartment, despite Alexander's efforts to make her comfortable. Alexander, used to controlling every aspect of his environment, had to learn to compromise on everything from meal times to bedtime routines. The real test came when River got sick. It was just a common cold, but his fever spiked one night, sending both parents into panic mode. Maya slipped automatically into doctor mode, while Alexander wanted to call in specialists from every top hospital in the city. "He needs rest and fluids, not a team of consultants," Maya insisted, holding a crying River while Alexander paced anxiously. "But what if it's something serious? I can have the best pediatricians here in minutes." "Alexander," Maya said firmly, "I am a pediatrician. Trust me on this." It was a turning point for them. Alexander realized he needed to trust Maya's experience as both a doctor and a mother, while Maya understood that his overprotectiveness came from a place of love and fear of losing what he just found. Gradually, they fell into a rhythm. Mornings became a cheerful chaos of breakfast and getting ready for the day. Alexander adjusted his schedule to be home for dinner, something his board of directors had to accept. Maya set up a small home office to handle clinic paperwork during the twins' nap time. The media attention eventually began to fade, but something else was growing stronger. The lines between their temporary arrangement and a real family were blurring. Alexander found himself lingering over goodnight kisses, not wanting to retreat to his separate wing of the penthouse. Maya caught herself watching him during quiet moments, seeing how naturally he'd taken to fatherhood. One evening, after the twins were asleep, they sat on the rooftop garden watching the city lights. The private playground Alexander had installed echoed with memories of happy shrieks and laughter from earlier that day. "They asked me something today," Maya said quietly. "Joy wanted to know why you don't sleep in our wing of the house like other daddies do." Alexander's heart skipped a beat. "What did you tell her?" "The truth," Maya replied. "That we're figuring things out, taking our time to make sure everything we do is what's best for them." "And what do you think is best?" Alexander asked, barely breathing. Maya turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the city lights. I think maybe we've been so focused on doing this right for the kids, we forgot to ask what might be right for us too. As they sat there under the stars, both thinking about the future, they realized that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from embracing the unexpected, from letting love grow naturally, and from trusting that the heart knows what it needs, even when the mind is still catching up. A year had passed since the DNA test that changed everything. The rooftop garden of Alexander's penthouse was transformed for a special occasion. Twinkling lights hung from pergolas, and white flowers decorated every surface. But the real magic wasn't in the decorations, it was in the laughter of 2 3-year-olds chasing each other between the guests' legs. Careful, sweethearts, Maya called out, watching Joy and River weave through the crowd in their fancy clothes. River's little bow tie was already crooked, and Joy's flower crown sat askew on her curls, but their faces glowed with happiness. This wasn't the lavish society wedding people might have expected from one of the world's wealthiest men. Instead, it was an intimate gathering of those who had been part of their journey. Dr. Chen was there, beaming proudly at the family she'd helped bring together. The kind elderly toy store employee who'd helped Alexander pick out his first gifts for the twins sat near the front. The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful. The twins insisted on standing right between their parents, holding both their hands throughout. When the officiant asked who gave their blessing to this union, it was Joy who proudly announced, "We do," making everyone laugh and tears spring to Maya's eyes. "I never thought I'd have this," Alexander said during his vows, his voice thick with emotion. "A year ago, I thought my chance of family was gone forever. Then fate brought me not just the children I never thought I could have, but also the love of my life. Maya, you've taught me that family isn't about perfect circumstances or careful planning. It's about love, trust, and being there for each other every day." Maya squeezed his hands, her own eyes shining. "When I chose to become a mother, I thought I was choosing to do it alone. I never imagined that the universe would have such an amazing plan in store. Alexander, you didn't just become a father to our children, you became my partner, my best friend, and the missing piece that made our family complete." River tugged at Alexander's sleeve during the rings exchange. "Daddy, is this when we get to be a real family?" Alexander knelt down to his son's level. "Buddy, we've been a real family all along. This is just a party to celebrate it." The reception was filled with touching moments. Joy insisted on having the first dance with both her parents, standing on Alexander's shoes while holding Maya's hand. River gave an impromptu speech that consisted mainly of explaining how his daddy taught him to build the tallest block towers and his mommy makes the best chocolate chip pancakes. Later in the evening, as the party wound down, Alexander found Maya standing at the edge of the roof, looking out over the city. The twins had finally crashed from their sugar high and were sleeping peacefully in a makeshift fort the guests had helped them build. "Happy?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning back against him. "Though I have to tell you something." Alexander tensed slightly, still programmed to worry when she used that tone. "What is it?" Maya turned in his arms, a mysterious smile playing on her lips. "Remember last month when I was feeling under the weather?" His eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Are you?" She nodded, tears of joy spilling over. "Looks like the universe isn't done surprising us yet. The twins are going to be big siblings." Alexander pulled her close, his own tears falling freely. "But I thought, the doctors said." "Dr. Chen says it's rare but not impossible," Maya explained. "Sometimes the body can heal in ways we don't expect. She calls it our miracle baby." They held each other under the stars, both thinking about the incredible journey that had brought them here. From a devastating diagnosis to an unexpected discovery, from 2 lonely people to a family bound together by love and fate. The next morning, they told the twins about their new sibling. Joy immediately began making plans for sharing her toys, while River had practical questions about where the baby would sleep and if it would like building blocks as much as he did. "Will the baby look like me?" Joy asked, climbing into Maya's lap. "Maybe," Maya smiled. "But what matters most is that the baby will be loved, just like you and your brother." "By all of us," Alexander added, gathering his family into a group hug. That's what families do. We love each other, no matter what." As they sat there together, Alexander thought about that day in Dr. Chen's office when he'd received the news that shattered his world. If someone had told him then that his greatest happiness would come from that very diagnosis, that it would lead him to Maya, to the twins, and now to another miracle on the way, he wouldn't have believed it. Life, he had learned, had a way of giving you exactly what you needed, even if it came in ways you never expected. His family wasn't created in the traditional way, but it was perfect in its own unique way. It was a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from embracing the unexpected, from letting love guide you, and from trusting that even in your darkest moments, something beautiful might be just around the corner. The story of their family would be told for years to come, not just as a tale of a billionaire finding his unknown children, but as a testament to the power of love, fate, and the beautiful ways that families can come together. It was a reminder that happiness doesn't always come in the package you expect, but it's all the more precious for being unexpected. And as the sun rose over their city, bringing the promise of a new day and new adventures, their family, unconventional, unexpected, but absolutely perfect, was just beginning its next chapter together.